So attendees are currently rising, currently sitting at 36.
Mm-hmm. Just let me know when it's ready to kick off, Eb. So. Are they all online now, Ebony, ready to go?
Yep, 104 currently, still climbing. So I think if you kick off and start saying your introduction.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. It is fantastic to have you all online tonight. My name is Beth Mohle and I'm Secretary of the Queensland Nurses and Midwives Union. It's my privilege to be hosting this virtual celebration of International Day of the Midwife that was last Wednesday and International Nurses Day that's been held today. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet in Brisbane. It's the Yagara and Turrbal people, but it's other people from across the state. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and reaffirm our commitment to closing the significant health disadvantage experienced by our First Nations people. As nurses and midwives and as the Principal Health Union at the QNMU, we have a critical role to play in closing that gap, and we are very, very committed to doing so and working and partnering with organisations and people to do so. So a very important acknowledgement to country tonight. We are thrilled to have everybody online, and I know that you've all been celebrating International Nurses Day in your facilities across the state, and last Wednesday you would have been celebrating International Day of the Midwife. It's so important that we take the time out to reflect together on the significant achievements that our professions make day in, day out. And that's what the purpose of tonight's event is to hear from four really inspiring colleagues who are going to present two from a midwifery profession perspective and two from a nursing perspective, their journey in our professions. And I'm sure that it'll be incredibly inspiring. Before we hand over, and I'll introduce our panellists soon, I'd just like to highlight a little bit of good news today on International Nurses Day. It was a very, very important day, as it is every day each year, but today we also had released the findings of the University of Pennsylvania and QUT evaluation of the rollout of our nurse-to-patient ratios and prescribed medical and surgical wards across Queensland Health. That was implemented from 1 July 2016. And some of you will remember 5 years ago to today, in a few hours' time in the evening, the legislation mandating minimum nurse-to-patient ratios in those areas was passed the Queensland Parliament. So we're at Parliament House today celebrating that 5-year milestone and celebrating International Nurses Day and belatedly celebrating International Day of the Midwife. But the important thing was the UPenn and QUT evaluation of the ratios rollout was published today. And that demonstrated that ratios not only save lives, they save money. So it was fantastic to see that internationally recognised. And I've got to say, this is internationally significant research. So many nurses and midwives from across the world were waiting, were sweating on this research, because in Queensland is the only jurisdiction that we've had a baseline research evidence that's been captured and then 2 years post. And it demonstrated 145 lives were estimated to be saved and around $70 million in savings in terms of decreased length of stay, in terms of decreased adverse outcomes. And when you compare that to the additional investment of nurses that were employed for that at 33 million, it was more than 2 times the return on investment. So it's a fantastic outcome. And so I think we need to celebrate that today. So that is available from the QNMU website if anyone wants to read. It's only a 9-page article, but it's incredibly important that it was published in the Lancet today, a preeminent health journal, as you know. So it's really terrific to have our 4 speakers here tonight, who I'll introduce in a minute. The 4 speakers are Christopher Dawber and Bousfield, Barbara Soong and Veronica Casey, who are going to, as I said, talk a little bit to us about their journey in nursing and midwifery and what the lessons that they've learned along the way in terms of their particular inspiring story. And as I said, it's really important that we do take the time out to listen to each other and to reflect upon our individual journeys and how they contribute to our collective story. We'll have Christopher who will kick off the presentation in a minute. And Christopher has to unfortunately leave because he has to attend to a family situation, but we'll hand over to Christopher in a minute, who has a presentation ready to go. But at the end of the 4 speakers, we will have time for Q&A, which Christopher won't be able to be with us for. But if anyone, maybe Christopher, has any questions at the end of your presentation, we might be able to take a few quick ones for you before you have to depart. Then at the end of the night, as I said, we've got a bit of time for Q&A for the other panellists, and then we've got a very, very important prize draw for those who are attending tonight. And so thanks to Frankie 4, all members who attend tonight's session will receive a $20 Frankie 4 voucher that will be sent to the attendees after the session. You'll also stand a chance to win one of 4 pairs of Frankie 4 shoes and one of 10 $50 Frankie 4 vouchers, which we'll be drawing at the end of the presentations. So a big thank you to Frankie 4 for actually providing that. I've got a pair of Frankie 4 shoes actually on tonight. They're very comfortable. So it's really fantastic. Ebony's going to be doing the draw for that tonight. So good luck to everybody who's going to be going to that prize draw. Now I'll just do some introductions to our first inspiring speaker for tonight. It's Christopher Dawber, who is joining us all the way from up on the Sunshine Coast. He's a clinical nurse and midwifery consultant at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital. Chris is a mental health clinical nurse consultant, credentialed mental health nurse, psychotherapist, group facilitator and clinical supervisor with over 35 years mental health nursing experience in both public and private settings. Last year, Christopher won an inaugural QNMU Positive Practice Champion Award in the QNMU Professional Practice Awards. So that was the first time we'd had those awards, and Chris was a fantastic inaugural winner in that Positive Practice Environment Champion category. And it was a very, very fantastic other candidates for it, a sterling candidate pool, and Chris was our winner in that. So it's fantastic to have you here tonight. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us, particularly given the circumstances, and I'll hand over to you now for your presentation.
Thanks very much, Beth. And yeah, it has been a big day for me, and but this is very important as well, and I really appreciate everybody rejuggling the agenda so that I could go first. I wanted to actually use my time to, and I'm very honoured to be counted amongst the inspirational nurses and midwives that are here, but I wanted to use my time and my story really to acknowledge other inspirational nurses that I've worked with, and there are so many of them. I could never, ever do justice to the list of those nurses that have inspired me in turn and have helped me to develop in my personal and professional career. I started my nursing as a mental health nurse back in the early 80s, and I was working at a place in Melbourne called the Hobson Park, Royal Park Hospital. And in those days, it was still in the days of hospital-based training, and there was a segregation between mental health services and general health services. And I'd never really aspired to be a nurse. In fact, originally I wanted to be a marine biologist. And then I went off the rails a little bit, as we do in our teenage years, and ended up working in a video arcade of all places. So that was a big leap from working in thinking of being a marine biologist. But I somehow stumbled into nursing, and it was, it was really a chance event where I was having a conversation with a relative of one of my friends, and she was an older lady, and she said her husband had been a mental health nurse and they paid you to train and you could work 2 days on, 2 days off. And I thought, well, this sounds good. I'll have a go at it. And I went through the aptitude test, and lo and behold, I passed. And I started at this place. Now, can you all see that on the screen? This is the old Royal Park Hospital, and it brings back many memories. And whilst there was some hard times and disturbing things that happened there, there was also some fantastic things, and there were some really inspirational nurses. there. And I realized fairly quickly that I loved nursing, and I didn't just like it, I loved it. And that there was something there in me, I guess, it resonated with me and it felt like it was what I should be doing. The first person that really inspired me was an educator I had back in those days. So I was only 18, remember, and very impressionable. And this man, John Watkins, was a mental health nurse who was an extremely quiet, respectful, and humanistic person who had a great curiosity about the personal journey of our patients and also of us as nurses. He really impressed on me how we're all fellow travelers on this journey, and that it's so important to remember and keep in mind the phenomenology of illness. And his guidance of nursing students really helped me to develop an understanding and appreciation of the human experience, which at that stage was focused primarily on the journey of those very, sometimes quite distressed and disturbed people I worked with, but also made me realize that many of my colleagues, and many of them today, travel similar journeys and have their own personal issues that they deal with, in addition to helping others in varying degrees of suffering. So I want to really acknowledge John. I've tried to contact him recently to find out where he's at, but I haven't been able to. So if he ever does watch this or hear, thank you, John, for what you gave me and so many others that trained and became more proficient at our craft of nursing. The second person is this character who I've listed as a fair dinkum bloke. He was an enrolled nurse, and I met him 10 or so years into my nursing career. He was probably one of the best nurses I've ever worked with. He was an enrolled nurse, but he was a very authentic person who also had a great compassion for the patients that he worked with. He and I developed a group program in an acute mental health unit, something that hadn't been done for some time. And I guess when I first started working at Hobson Park Hospital, which was in Traralgon, there was not much happening for the patients that were in there. They would sit around the wards smoking, because you're allowed to smoke inside back in those days, and really stuck with their own thoughts. So we started off doing things like taking them out for a bit of a treasure hunt in the gardens. Then we started doing relaxation therapy. Then we started art therapy, and then we got an occupational therapist involved, and we started doing some groups, and we began doing psychotherapy groups, although at that stage we didn't know what they were. And then we got a bus and we started to get funding, and we had some good results, and the evidence we started gathering on the outcomes of the program showed that a lot of things were changing for patients. For one example was that we went from 2 or 3 incidents of aggression a day to 1 or 2 a month. And it was quite remarkable that as these people became more and more involved in meaningful activity, they seemed to be able to connect with each other as well. And so this idea of peer support became a big part of what we were doing. Keith was also able to act as a container for the anxiety of those around him. He could come in and just talk to people in an authentic, fair dinkum manner. He'd sort of, you know, give people a bit of a ribbing and really at the same time convey an air of professionalism. I really want to acknowledge him for his emotional intelligence. And it made me realize that some of these qualities and skills we have are not things we learn academically. The next person I want to acknowledge is much more recent, and she's still working at the Sunshine Coast Hospital. And the inspiration she provided me was in my own personal journey as a patient. I had struggled with pelvic and hip pain for a long period of time and ended up having to have a bilateral hip replacement. And in the orthopedics ward, this young nurse who was then a graduate, she conveyed this sense of care and compassion that was so powerful. I mean, one day I remember she came in and looked and she said, look, your toes look fairly blue. You know, I'm a bit worried. I'll just give them a bit of a massage. And she just gave them what may have been just a simple nursing procedure to her, but was so powerful and meaningful to me. And it really conveyed to me how important the therapeutic use of self is, and also how palpably empathy can be conveyed to our patients through the gentle, kind, and somewhat seemingly small acts that we are able to provide for them. This is a group of nurses, and I want to acknowledge these guys because they've been pivotal in the development of my professional persona. This is the Australian College of Mental Health Nurses, CL Nurses Special Interest Group, and this is taken at one of our conferences. Amongst them, you know, some of our chairpersons, Julie Sharrock, Tim Wand and John Foster, but also a number of very inspirational Queensland CL nurses, Paul McNamara up in Cairns, Todd Bagshaw at the Prince Charles, Simone Harvey and Jane Whitford were all part of an early supervision group when I first started in CL Psych, and they really conveyed to me how important the holistic view of healthcare is, something which I feel we need to keep reminding ourselves of in this climate of specialization and focus on tasks and quantity of care. They helped me to realize the importance, once again, of the quality of care that we provide. They also helped me to understand how important it is to remain humble, that although I've been honoured to be seen as an inspirational nurse here, I hope that my story also conveys how there are so many others that could justifiably fill this place. Finally, I want to acknowledge the importance of clinical supervision and the important contribution that those who attend my reflective practice groups and engage with me in clinical supervision is. Clinical supervision for nurses is, I believe, a really important professional development activity that we need to embrace. The restorative, formative, and normative benefits of supervision allow us to mentalize and develop empathy further, understand ourselves and the reasons we act the way we do, and look at ways that we can manage and handle situations differently. So I want to thank all of you who've been involved in my groups. Not just, I want you to know that you give me something when you come. And finally, I just want to acknowledge this chap, and this is the reason that I'm leaving early. Peter O'Reilly, a good friend of mine and a mental health nurse who I've worked with for 20 years, passed away today. He was a rough diamond for sure, you know, Scottish from Glasgow. If you took all the F's out of his language, it was hard to understand him. But he was a very empathic person as well. He had an ability to connect with the young guys that were a bit antisocial and that he could just talk to them, and a sort of air of calm would descend. So I want to acknowledge you, Pete, and thank you. I think that's all I have to say. I appreciate this opportunity. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Chris. And we know how difficult this is for you. And we really do appreciate you spending this time with us. And you do need to be with your partner now, but we'll let you go. But has anyone got any questions for Chris before he leaves? I've got one, Chris, just to kick off. It was a fantastic presentation, and it just reminds us about how important we are to each other in terms of supporting each other, the relationships that we form within nursing and midwifery. Have you got any tips in terms of what you've learned along the way about how we stay anchored and true to ourselves and to what's important to us? Any words of wisdom about that?
Yes, I do. I think that it's very important that we all continue to work on our own self-development, not just professionally, but personally. I think that the language we use defines not only our patients, but ourselves and our nurses as a group. And I think that one of the threats at the moment to our craft of nursing, the interpersonal aspects of caregiving, is the growing rise of the business of healthcare. I think we really all have an obligation to push back against that and to honour compassion, empathy, and the interpersonal aspects of care that are we know they're so important to our patients, but they're the things that also give us as nurses the greatest compassion, satisfaction, and sense of self-efficacy in our role as a nurse. So I think we all need to take a breath. Everyone who knows me knows that I bang on endlessly about the importance of mindfulness practice, of thinking about our colleagues as well as our patients, and trying to create a culture of support. Nurses work best when we work together. So that's my advice.
Yes, we're naturally collectivist beings.
We aren't we? Yes,
yeah.
That's a great thing.
Yeah, and I think if anyone's got any questions for Chris, can you type them into the chat box? It was a fantastic presentation, Chris, very reflective and humbling, as Chris said there too as well. Was terrific to hear your words tonight. So it was a great presentation. If there aren't any questions, there's a lot of fantastic positive feedback there for you though, Chris, about how excellent a speaker you are and how inspirational it was and how humbling. So it was fantastic, and everyone's thoughts are with you at this very difficult time. We will let you go now to be with your partner, and our condolences to you. Take care, Chris.
Happy Midwives and Nurses Day to everybody. You're all such inspirational people. I want to thank you all for being part of our profession.
Thank you so much, Chris. You take care of yourself, and we will let you go now. So thank you. That was a fantastic presentation by Chris, and under very, very difficult circumstances, it was fantastic that he could stay on to do that. He really did want to deliver on that commitment for us tonight. Our next speaker is Anne Bousfield, who's coming to us from Roma tonight with that lovely background there for her screen. So Anne works as a midwifery unit manager at Roma Hospital and has worked in various maternity and neonatal care settings, from the Royal Women's Hospital in Melbourne, a freestanding birth centre, and metropolitan, regional and rural birthing units. She is passionate about assisting women to give birth, continuity of midwifery care, and partnering with universities to grow local rural midwifery workforces. Please welcome Anne, and over to you now, Anne.
Thanks very much, Beth. Gee, I wish I had gone first after having to follow that presentation from Chris, but anyway, we'll we'll work through that. Yes, I'm currently in Rome at the moment. My background here is near Bollen, which is further southwest of here. I grew up between Mitchell and Bollen, so this is home territory for me. I grew up with, you know, on School of the Air, and then heading off to boarding school, etc. So I've been back in the southwest for almost 10 years now. I've still got a mum in Mitchell and family around, so I'm kind of back on home territory, which is lovely. But in the meantime, I'd worked in Toowoomba, Brisbane, Melbourne, and I worked at the Hawthorn Birth Centre at the time, which is a freestanding birth centre. There was an obstetrician there who introduced water birth to Australia back in the 80s, and so I learnt a lot from him. So I mean, so some really influential people in my life. Was one of those is an obstetrician who's was the most amazing man, who's now still around in his 90s now. But I really wanted to talk about one of my midwife colleagues who had the biggest influence on my life, and her name was Barb, and I worked with her first at the Hawthorn Birth Centre, which is a freestanding birth centre in Melbourne. And she was quite a number of years older than me. She had 3 boys who were in their 20s at the time, and I hadn't had any children at this stage. And she used to tell me the story of her births, and she told me how she loved being in labour. And at that time she said that, you know, she wanted to, when she was in labour, she wanted to give birth in an upright position, and at that time you had to be on your back. But she said she had a private doctor who kept on pushing her back on her back as she was trying to squat on the bed. So she fired him, and she told him he was fired, and she went over into the corner and she squatted and she birthed her own baby into her hands. And I just thought that was so gutsy for 40 or 50 years ago, you know. But when she told me she just loved being in labour, I did think she was over the top. But she told me then about how it was the miracle of birth I'm sorry if you can hear some stuff in the background. There's a bit of closing up around here happening. But you said this miracle of being able to birth this baby into the world. She just loved that. She told me how every contraction she welcomed, because she had reframed it totally to this contraction, whilst she would sometimes think it was painful, she would ride that with a reframing of a miraculous process that was going on in her body. And I thought after a while, wow. And then I saw the stats, her stats of her caseload of women. It was phenomenal. It would make you think that birth was a totally natural process where nothing went wrong. And I got to see the proof in that pudding. And so I talked to her about it for a bit, and I thought, I've got to do that for my own. That's what I'm going to do when I'm in labour. Because it was just so amazing what I saw her and the way she got into these women's heads. She got into their heads in a way that she just affirmed that they were able to do it. And so that's what I thought I would do. And I have to say that it was the best decision I'd ever made for when I was in labour myself. I just kept on reframing and reframing and reframing, because I saw her almost all straightforward, uncomplicated births. So that was, I since have been a midwife educator. I'm a clinical midwife consultant for the Southwest, so I look after St George, Roma and Charleville. But when I've had students, and I still get, we get students out here, and we're working on, we had our first Bachelor of Midwifery rurally trained undergraduate here who's been out 5 years now, so we know that works. But it was this business of, if I could pass that on to students like Barb had passed on to me, then we could have a really, really competent and, as Chris was saying, emotionally intelligent workforce who actually believe this stuff. And so continuity midwifery care works. It has the outcomes of continuity midwifery care. You know, we know the stats; they're far better than mainstream care. We need to be promoting it. We need to be, for the sake of our women in Queensland, to be embracing it. You know, developing more of those models, etc. We do have 100% continuity midwifery care in the Southwest, so our women actually, you know, don't know what it's like to have a fragmented model, which suits me just fine. And one of my motivations was, my mother gave birth in the Mitchell Hospital many, many years ago, you know, for 4 of us. And she was, you know, we lived remotely, so she never really had any opportunity for continuity care or postnatal follow-up, etc. And I saw the difficulties that she had. So that's been my motivation coming back to the Southwest. And because I just think, you know, rural women deserve just as good a care as anyone else. So that continues to be my motivation. And I always think of Barb, you know, who taught me those amazing lessons in midwifery and how to teach women to be in labour and give birth.
That's fantastic, Barb. Barb sounds like she was just a very special, one-of-a-kind person.
She was, and is. She still is.
She still is. She's still. That's fantastic.
I think she's retired now. But
if everyone could keep their questions for the end, we'll have some other speakers. We're going to have a sort of like a bit of a joint Q&A session at the end. Ebony, has Barbara joined us? Barbara Soong.
Yes, Barbara is here.
Barbara is here. Terrific. I just can't see you, Barbara. I'm sorry. I will introduce you now. It's fantastic to have you as well. So Barb's going to be our next inspirational speaker tonight, and Barb is a supporting committee member of the Queensland branch of the Australian College of Midwives. She's also published a number of journal articles on topics such as interventions for ketosis during labour and maternal position at midwife-attended birth and perinatal trauma. Is there an association? So Barb's just going to be here tonight to share with us her inspirational stories and her lessons that she's learnt during her midwifery career. So thank you for joining us tonight, Barb, and over to you now.
Thank you, Beth. I'm really sorry. The technology's failed me because we're still on Windows 7 here. So my headset's not working. Nothing's working. I'm surprised the video's working, so apologise now. My midwifery story started 32 years ago. I did general nursing like everybody else did at the time, and I just wanted to be a midwife. I did a rotation during my general training, and I knew straight away. We were fortunate where I did my training. We got a month's rotation into maternity, and they allowed us to be present in the old labour wards back then. So once I saw women birth, and it was quite progressive. It wasn't, as Anne mentioned, women on their backs. These women were on their hands and knees. They were standing. And this was a tertiary hospital in Sydney, and I thought, wow, this is so progressive. And so I proceeded to apply anywhere to do my midwifery, because I thought, I want to be a midwife. I don't care how I do it, where I do it. I just want to be a midwife. So I did my midwife in a regional centre. I learnt what normal was. There was no epidurals, there was no monitoring, very few cesarean sections. We did vaginal breech. Everything they don't do now, we did back then. We even did perineal shaves as well. So after I finished my midwifery training, it was a case of apply for a job anywhere. So wherever you could get a job, you just applied. That was the state of the nation back then. And you had to work full time. There was none of this 1-2 days a week. It was when you applied for a job, you had to work full time. So I've been working in a private tertiary referral hospital. I've worked in all areas of midwifery. I've done midwives clinics. I've done midwifery group practice. I was part of the initial Commonwealth community midwifery service, and that was the initiation of midwifery group practice in Queensland. I learned a lot from that. Having the grassroots of being in a smaller regional hospital really taught me about continuity care. So we saw women in the antenatal clinic. You never were rostered in one place for 6 months or 3 months. It was every day, it was a different day. So if you saw a woman in clinic and then you were rostered to the old labour ward back then, you would look after them, and then you'd be on postnatal for a few days. So that's when I got a really, really good grasp of what continuity of midwifery care was and how important it was to support women and their families, because it's a big life-changing moment for them, the transition into parenthood. So over the years, you know, what happens is midwives just want to work in labour ward. They stay there. They think that labour ward's the be-all, end-all, but it's not. It's the whole continuity. You have to prepare women, work with them, be beside them during the antenatal period, then provide some support in labour, because not all midwives want to work in the full continuity scope, but then follow them up postnatal. So in my 15 years working in a labour ward birthing area, I looked after women with problems. So these were the people with preterm labour. We didn't have ultrasound as well as it is now. So you often would see these diagnoses. So you'd see the gastroschisis and folliceals. You see these babies born with cleft lips and palates that were undiagnosed. And looking after women that were in preterm labour, and potentially, you know, the uncertainty with having a preterm child, and at least 100 days in the nursery if the baby is born under 25 weeks, say, I developed a really big interest in looking after women with complex problems and women with medical conditions. So at that time, back in the 90s, we opened the first maternal fetal medicine unit in Queensland. And there's a lot of midwives that have been inspirational in my career, but one obstetrician MFM specialist was Professor Foong Chan, who's unfortunately passed away 13 years ago now. So she was a big inspiration for me. She taught me what the abnormal was. She supported me. I was able to look after women in pregnancy with cancer, complex medical problems. I've got 2 women I look after at the moment with renal dialysis. These are the types of women that would normally not get midwifery care. There's navigator roles now. I think I see my role as completely different to a navigator because I actually provide midwifery care. I follow them through. Whereas a navigator just provides a direction rather than takes responsibility for the woman, because the medical officers or the obstetricians or obstetric physicians or whichever specialists that are involved like to take ownership. But I think having been a midwife that is a midwife, I've had to change the way I think, because it's about working in a multidisciplinary team. So it's not all about the midwife, whereas I used to think, yep, I'm the midwife, I do this. I know what I'm doing. Stay out of the room. I know what I'm doing. But it's now trying to bring the best possible care for these women to ensure you get the most optimal outcome you can get. So if you've got a mother whose baby has a life-limiting condition, then you work with the mother and the family to prepare them. And nothing can ever prepare a mother whose baby's going to die. Nothing can prepare a woman making a decision to end her pregnancy, to discontinue her pregnancy for whatever reason. That sits with them for the rest of their lives. And they say, and it's working with women to say, this is a decision you make now, and then to ensure these women are supported. Now, not all women are supported. Some come from very difficult situations, as we've seen in the media recently, with domestic violence, the incarceration, there's drug and alcohol, there's teenage pregnancies, and we're seeing a lot more mature women having babies, and we're talking about late 40s, 50s even. So there's the whole gamut of being able to provide care to these women and be privileged enough that these women accept you as part of their life and a special time when they're pregnant, because we're only a very, very, very small part of it. The rest of life is when they step outside the building, whether they have their baby at home or whether they have it in hospital. We have to set the groundwork to ensure that they get a good start to parenting. And I think we miss that. I think we miss many opportunities. People think, breastfeeding's important, but people go, well, it's not for me. That's okay. That's their choice. But we have to set these children up. There's a lot of work at Queensland Health at the moment with the first 1,000 days, reading to babies, talking to babies, ensuring these children get a good start, because there's too many problems that we see now, that putting a digital device in front of them as a babysitting tool. I think parents have forgotten how to communicate with their baby, even teaching parents about baby cues. So I think as a midwife, I think we're in a privileged position. We can set the foundations to ensure families get off to a good start. I think it's a lot of it is the individual midwife and their philosophies and belief. It's about being with the woman, being with the family, but we're not the centre of care. It is the mother that's the centre of care. It is about the mother and the family. So I think, so my journey is a bit different to Anne's. I prefer to look after the women with the complex pregnancies or the babies with complex problems. My phone's ringing there, so someone's looking for me. So, the phone never stops. I thought I wasn't going to make it today because I had a young woman, a refugee woman, who couldn't get home. So I'm on the phone trying to find the social worker to get her a ride home because it was pouring down rain. This is beyond what we do. And it's, if you make a difference by just doing that little bit extra, that's what they will remember you for. That's my story.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was really terrific to hear that. And it's those really important moments that matter, isn't it, that we can actually touch people's life, and it's such a privilege to play that role. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our last speaker tonight is Veronica Casey, and Veronica is Executive Director of Nursing and Midwifery Services at Metro South Hospital and Health Service. And Veronica has held a wide range of nursing executive leadership positions in Queensland Health since 1998. In 2010, she was appointed as one of the 3 inaugural international commissioners for the American Nurses Credentialing Centre, and in 2014 was appointed as a board member of the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia. And very importantly, we're so proud of Veronica for this. This year, Veronica was appointed as chair of the NMBA. In addition, in 2019, Veronica was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia in recognition for her significant service to nursing, medical education and to community health. And it's fantastic to have you here with us tonight, Veronica, to hear your story. So over to you now.
Thanks, Beth. And look, I feel so humbled to be here, and I'm not sure what I am doing here based on the panelists that are there. I recognise you all and thank you. And all the nurses online tonight in our virtual world as we now know it. I just want to wish you the recognition and of your service and your commitment for our Day of the Midwife and our International Nurses Day. I think that I feel a bit overwhelmed to be talking, to be perfectly honest, but I'll pull myself together. I'll just have a little glass of water. I've been invited tonight, and thank you for the invite, to really tell my story about nursing and my midwifery life. And I'll just give you all a little laugh. Not yesterday, last week, I was down at one of our maternity services, and I was telling some younger midwives that when I actually was a midwife, in fact, there were 2 professions. I'm old enough to remember when there were 2 professions and that we've done the journey. So I don't want to give you the whole history of nursing and midwifery in Queensland, but I thought I would like to highlight a couple of areas that it's been such a privilege. And it's really interesting with Beth's intro. This is a job I really never wanted to do. For some people, you might know Brisbane. I'm a Brisbane girl. I trained at the Royal Brisbane. PAs and Metro South still have never forgiven me for that, but that's okay. And I wanted to be the 2IC in Ward 15, which was a big endocrine medical ward, which I adored. And I love medical and older patients. And, you know, I have all these loves that I have. And that's what I wanted to be till I retired. And that was my happiness in providing that direct care to patients. Somehow that didn't quite work out for me after a few years. Well, it's worked out for me. And I've been so lucky. I have had so many opportunities. But there's a thread through there around other people who influence where you sort of take your journey and who you're with in that journey. But there's a couple of constants that are the take-home message that I would like to share, and I think that I've already heard them. But I've also always considered it a privilege to be a nurse. And when I decided I would come nursing, when I was at school, I was 13 years old, I was in grade 9. If you're not outside Queensland old enough, you won't know what that means, but it was well before I could finish school. But having said that, I took myself off to the Royal Brisbane, I signed up, and in fact, I didn't even need to finish a particular level of school because I could have gone in as a cadet. Well, my mother and father, as you can imagine, had a conniption, for want of a better word, and I was made to finish senior, and I was a little bit ahead of myself in age-wise, so I had to wait to go nursing. So on the 13th of March in 1977, yes, that's a lifetime ago that some people won't even remember, I waited. I had my bags packed after Christmas, and I worked at a department store called McDonald & East until I could do that. I was so excited. And there my journey began. And until a few years later, I was still a bit cranky with my parents because I just wanted to actually care for people. I got into uni. I still didn't want to do that. They said, just wait. Nursing. So, you know, I think the take-home message, as Chris and others have said, it's the connectedness. And I often reflect on the opportunities I've had, the wonderful people I've worked with in many different settings and roles. You know, what it says to me makes the difference is the connectedness. Any role, it's about the connectedness to why we are nurses and midwives. And that's humanity. It's about holistic care. It is about ourselves, and it is about our value system. And I hope I remain true to that to today. And, you know, look, it's really interesting. When I started, as you can imagine, nursing, midwifery was a recognised profession, but nursing wasn't. It was a vocation, it was a job, it was for nice people. So I've actually lived through some watershed moments. Some of it I had no idea really what I was living through. And before the days that people were called mentors, and some of you will remember Beth, Judy Salvadori, leaders who were passionate, absolutely gave of themselves to uplift others and support them. They kept on telling me that I needed to do this, that, go on and do further studies, improve my practice, take risks and opportunities when different positions or roles would come up, or research. And so in the 80s, it was a really, as many of us, if we're Queenslanders or have worked in Queensland, that's when our education lifted and professionalisation of nursing really was powerful. And I remember the nurses walking on Parliament. I mean, I didn't truly understand it. I obviously was a bit naive and stupid, but I truly didn't understand it till after the power of those courageous men and women from all walks of the profession, all parts of the state, collective, and for the right reason, not about themselves. It was about the profession and practice, and the practice means we're connected to our community and the people we serve and each other. So, you know, we then roll through the 80s and the 90s and the year 2000. Anyone remember Y2K? And we had research, we grew, regulation matured. I'm going to just put a plug in there. Year 2000 BPF begins and maturing in a workforce. I just thought a few little highlights there. EB5 at a different time. But I'd like to leap forward to the point I still actually I'd go from midwifery to aged care to different things. And I guess part of my reflection is always based on your own journey. But one of the great privileges we have is actually we can be diverse, we can be specialised, we can actually move around. We have the most wonderful profession, but the core elements never change. And our absolute value system and our professionalism together is absolutely where we must remain. And we must not remain absolutely passive around that. We have to be vocal. We have to say that's as important as all the education research, very important. Evidence, politicisation, all of that's absolutely wonderful. But unless we keep to our core and our true set of values and principles and why we exist, I do believe that we are at risk at times. So I've actually had the privilege of working with the great teams. I learn from people every day. I think the mantra I do have, and I would hope there's a visibility and a connection with my colleagues, nurses who are direct care nurses, to researchers, to academics, to industrial officers, whatever they might be. We need to stay connected and true. We need to have diversity of thought. We need to be courageous in having those discussions for the betterment of the profession. And I loved before when we were talking about that collectivism, we love to work in teams. Even if you've got a position, or I was just thinking about Anne, I have met Anne before, and people might work in different roles, but it is that collective piece that we love. We actually get energy from that. So for me, I'm just going to highlight a couple of the changes that somewhat disturb me. And it's probably not about the profession, but it's, you know, as I get to my vintage, as I call it, I'm a bit seasoned. You know what I don't stay awake at night, and I have a great belief that we can work through this, and we'll never solve it, but we can influence, we can, you know, adapt as needed, and we can take a leap forward and provide the leadership. But the areas of, you know, occupational violence, the expectations of nurses about not giving the power that's needed from time to time. Now, this will be very different for everybody's journey. But, you know, when I was thinking around those great mentors who weren't called mentors in those days, I just thought they were pushy women, really, and a couple of men. But they were mentors. They were challenging your critical thinking. They were saying, be courageous, take leadership, transform, give to others, make sure you listen to people who know the business or know the clinical practice. Do not think you have to know everything. And, you know, that's very sobering, because nursing and midwifery, to a lesser extent, has always been potentially hierarchical, and that can be seen as a negative. I'd like to put a different lens on the now, and I think it's about shared governance. We have roles, we have different responsibilities, but we actually have the same journey to go on, and we should actually embrace that with each other and understand it. And I guess the other thing for me is, I hate the word invest, and somebody said that to me today. It's not. We are a trusted profession. With that comes amazing responsibilities, not only within the professions, and I'll say the professions, but with our community we serve and our public and our peers. We need to build a platform for the future. That's please never use the word legacy with me either. This is about working through and taking the journey. We don't know what that journey, even with or without pandemic, we need to be courageous and take that where it needs to go. The reflective practice and development shouldn't be seen as an extra add-on. This is part of our ethos and growth, and re-energizing. We don't always look after ourselves as well as we, well, I shouldn't say we, because it's probably me, but I have had in feedback a lot of that I'm not a good role model. So I take that on board and I try really hard, I just don't succeed. And build on your personal learnings. They're so important. Don't think that everybody else is better, but have that faith that we can actually share those conversations. I think the milestones for me, just quickly, and I am aware of time and I don't want to take it up, Beth, but is I did some aged care work, believe it or not, in the 90s for the ANMF. This is going well back in history. And I do have a passion around aged care. And at that time, even as a younger woman and professional, I was absolutely really worried about aged care then. And you can imagine the journey we've had over years. And I am so hopeful and guardedly optimistic around what that future might bring. But I think through the collective wisdom and energies of many different groups, particularly QNMU and others and ourselves and individuals and other disciplines as well, I'm hoping that that journey so improves, and nursing has to be at the heart of aged care for those absolutely wonderful people who has actually built our country. So I think that's important. The other piece is around the quality of life for all our communities and different groups that we not look after, but be in concert with. The other thing is contributing to a team positive practice environment. And I know that rolls off the tongue now, but for me, that is around, we're a team. It's shared governance. It's actually about that opportunity to make a difference and actually feel it and deliver on it. But it's not about hierarchies. It's about us working together. But the most important part for me, if I have to say the highlights, and there haven't been that many lowlights, can I say? I know we go through, as I call them, speed bumps on the road to heaven, but it is about having a future. It is about being courageous enough to take it forward, or otherwise I don't believe we are leaders at all levels, but we should be. And I think the most wonderful part for me has been working with the colleagues over the last decades who have taught me to be a better self, who haven't been afraid to give feedback. I don't always like what I hear. Like, you know how you have a perception of yourself, like I sort of see myself as a thinner person, younger person, but that's actually not the reality of the evidence. And so you do have to really have, it's not just reflecting on the day, it's actually seeking that feedback and making and really having that journey with our colleagues. And I know time is absolutely coming to the end, but my themes with my, you know, at a point where we had mentorship, and that would be the glue to me. That would be the glue to me. We have to give to each other and help, peer support, mentorship. It'll be different for different people what you need, but we actually have to be part of that. We have to be part and together in that. So you know, my mentors, who I didn't know what that name meant, well, it didn't exist when I was young. Am I not fortunate that they sought me out? Because I wanted to be the 2IC at Ward 15 at the Royal Brisbane Hospital until I was 65, and I could retire. And now I work with the most amazing and wonderful team. I know many of you. Energy begets energy. And it's not Pollyanna. We mustn't be Pollyanna. We mustn't be unrealistic, but we can contribute, and it's incumbent of us to be leaders. And we stay true to the understanding of both our professions. We all make a unique contribution. We should never be ashamed of that. And I do absolutely implore, and I'm sure this is not the group that would do this, but I do not ever want to hear anyone apologising for their profession. Never apologise. We should be so proud of our profession and our practice. And so therefore connection and meaningful work with colleagues and consumers and the community and other disciplines, so important. And we have to contribute with energy and excellence. So I might leave it there, Beth. I did have a bit more, but I know I've rabbited on, and I do apologise, but I'm inspired by all of you every day, and thank you.
Oh, never apologise for what you say and do, Veronica. It's always inspirational listening to you. So thank you so much. And Sharon added a bit of a comment in there. There must be something special about Ward 15 because she loved working there as well, and I did too.
No, I did. I loved it.
I worked at Ward 15 after I finished my training, and had one of the most inspirational mentors and leaders in Ellen Burns there as a charge nurse at the time. So there was something special about Ward 15. We've got a lot of questions, everybody.
I'm sorry.
No, but there's some fantastic questions here for everybody, but I'll try to get through as many of them as I can, everybody. So the first one is to Barb from Nicola. Is it hard, Barb, sometimes when some mothers and families make decisions that you may not necessarily morally support, and how do you go about approaching those situations? So that's a question for you, Barb. You're on mute. So.
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you. I think it's, you've got to take it back to the first principles. It's not about you. This is about this woman and her family. What is going to be best for her and her family at that point in time? Because the conversations you have with women, the women have been my greatest teachers. Every woman's story is very different. Obviously we see a lot of women who discontinue their pregnancy, or whose baby have a life-limiting condition, or opt for palliative care. I think they need time to consider their decisions. Whatever I think, it's got nothing to do with it, because your role as a midwife is to support that family. So if whether or not you agree or not, and in the termination of pregnancy clinical guidelines, there's at the bottom of the first page, there is conscientious objection. So if you do conscientiously object, you remove yourself from the situation, and then you've got to know what your limits are and understand your scope of practice.
So that's a very good point. And I think we need to actually understand how we keep ourselves resilient too in our professions. And there's a good question here for all of the panelists, I think, in terms of tips for thriving. This is from Caitlin, for thriving after graduation. I mean, what are the, everyone's warned about burnout and anxiety, but what are the pots of gold to look out for and the top tips for just diving in there and succeeding? So who would like to take that one as a first question?
I will.
Barb, yeah.
I was always on the impression you take every opportunity you can grab. No matter how early you are in your career, you take it. Like, it doesn't matter. Cleaning the pan room, when we used to clean it with the old Ajax and then clean it with Metho and then get the towel and scrub it so you could see your face. It didn't matter. It was all about take every opportunity till you find what you're really, really passionate about. Like cleaning is still, I wouldn't say I'm passionate about it, but I still clean. I still pick up, linen, I pick up, do everything. But I don't have to do that in my role as a manager. But I do it because I want to, I work alongside my staff. So, take every opportunity. The people might think you're a pain in the butt, but you've got to think, I get one go at learning. So, and if it's something you've never seen before, then even more opportunity, because you may not see it again.
What about you, Anne? What tips have you got for thriving?
I would say never ever neglect self-care. I mean, as mothers, as women, as nurses and midwives, we've all done it. We've all neglected ourselves because we see, for the betterment of others. But in the end, you have to self-care so that you can actually give your best to your clients. And it's been a hard road for me from time to time. I've learnt that the hard way. But I was thinking last year when someone rang me up about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was in Roma, and they said, "Anne, we need you to be in Charleville tomorrow at 9 o'clock." And I went, actually, I go walking from between 6 and 7. So I can be there by 10:30 or 11. And they went, "Oh." But that's because I've learnt the hard way, self-care.
Yep, thanks. And what about you, Veronica? What tips have you got?
I think Anne's nailed it with self-care, but I think the other thing is, I like Barb's response, be enthusiastic, take on board energy from others and opportunities. And also, don't be afraid. There is no such thing as failure. Seriously, it is about that learning, reflective learning, and take the time. Busy can cause busyness. I think it's, I learned the hard way as well. Not quite, well, a bit like Anne, but, I had a boss that used to say to me, and he was a very wise man, he was an administrator, he said, hasten slowly, you'll get there faster, but always take time to look at what's true and valuable. And that doesn't mean time, but it's that self-care reflection and that learning. Yeah.
Thanks, Veronica. Now we've got a question from Zoe for Barb, and it's, Barb, could you discuss how you progressed from a hands-on practice to an academic role, like publishing journal articles? How did your mindset progress? And how did you overcome dealing with feelings of incompetence when dealing with really complex patients? How did you overcome that? So it's a bit of a long question from Zoe with a few elements.
Self-care, I agree. Because if you don't look after yourself, no one else is going to do it. So I'm not an academic. I never have been and I never will be. So acknowledging not being an academic is the first thing. Probably at the time, I haven't published anything in the last probably 8 to 10 years, only because time is my problem. And I think everyone that's online can understand time management is a huge part of what we have to learn to manage. And we're supposed to work 8 hours a day. Well, how many of us actually work 8 hours a day? We probably put in more hours than what we actually do. But probably I wrote those papers when I was much younger, and then I had a bit more time, and I wrote articles on topics that I was really interested in. The perineal trauma was something absolutely I had an interest in. I still do today, having been a co-author in the perineal trauma clinical guidelines. So just switch on and switch off. I think that was part of the question from being an academic to clinician. There's no issue. I think in my job, I'm very fortunate. I think I have the best job because I do half management and half clinical. So it's chaotic. It can be a bit all over the place, as you see. Like everyone hopefully has gone home now. So I'll stay back a couple of hours because it's the best time of day because it's quiet. I get so much more done. So, but that's a willingness you have to decide for yourself. How much are you prepared to put into your job? Because you are who you are and what you want to be. So I'm not sure if I've answered that question. I have to.
Thanks, Barb. And
okay.
we've probably gone a bit over time, but I might just ask a few more quick questions, then we'll go to the prize draw because there's so many great questions here. I'm trying to combine a few of them so that you can all chip in. One is to all the panel about being concerned about the future of nursing. The future of nursing concerns me. How do we support new grads and secure them in employment into the future? And a similar one, a little bit similar. It's asked to Veronica, but I've got to ask it to all the panellists. What do you think are the greatest challenges for nurses graduating now compared to when graduates trained in, you know, when we were training. So a bit of a theme there about how we better support graduates. So Veronica, did you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, look, actually, it's interesting. History is a bit of a cycle. When I finished, in fact, there were no jobs. So that's 1980, 13th of March, 1980. There were no jobs, still hospital training. But, you know, it's interesting. I was just persistent. No one was going to say no to me, so because I wanted to look after. And I loved medical wards. I hadn't done a lot of that. So I chose to be fluid where I could go. I just wanted to nurse. But, you know, it's interesting. My advice is I think the future is very bright. I think we actually need to build that future. We need to care for whether they are grads or people changing career directions or whatever it might be. We are renowned for, there's publications on eating our young. You know, I think I hope that's a myth now. It is actually about embracing that. But the other thing is making sure that we actually have positions and we actually grow our workforce to ensure there are positions, not in hospital settings. I think the other thing is we need to look more broadly. I think midwifery's probably got their act together a bit more in times of that, but I think we could look very differently, some of us, and I know people in my own health service, I sometimes think I've gone mad because I'm going, why do you have to come into a big acute hospital? Why? And they get a bit cranky with me, but until somebody can answer why, I'm not going to stop asking the question.
Thanks, Veronica. Anne, what about you? What tips have you got for new grad and early career nurses and midwives?
Well, to start off, I was thinking about what Veronica said, being the history, and I look at where midwifery's come in the last 35 years, and you know that's been a lot of hard work as well by midwives who've lobbied, but more importantly, women who have lobbied for better access to maternity care, and I think of the steps we've made, and I mean I was one of those silly people that ran for Parliament in 2007 to get that Medicare for midwives, and you know. Which we got, but my goodness, you know, the things we sometimes sign up to, I don't know. And I look at as we've moved forward with with those midwives in private practice, you know, now having access to Medicare and midwife-led models flourishing, you know, becoming more and more just normal mainstream throughout Queensland and Australia. So, yeah, I'm with Veronica. I think we've got a tendency to look at the problems we've got right now, but if we just step back and take a look, you know, we've actually come a long way, and we're going to go further, because in terms of and I agree totally with Barb, you know, we need to work in a multidisciplinary team because not all of our women are low risk, you know, and they need the best possible care as well. But when it comes to the role of midwifery and the evidence that sits with us in terms of better outcomes for midwifery-led care and continuity midwifery care, the evidence is with us. You know, we don't have to fight that over again. Oh, we still do, but the evidence is there. So I think we do have a future that's worth going for. Now, in terms of how do we support midwifery graduates, I'm generally only familiar with what we do out in rural and remote now. And we're very conscious of needing to build a workforce because we have big issues, particularly with midwifery workforce in rural and remote. So we only have MGP. So I think our graduates really, really benefit from going straight into an MGP with the support of a couple of other midwives in their midwifery group partnership, and those midwives are hothoused. You know, when they can see every day the outcomes of their decision making or the decision making that the team has made for this woman, rather than fragmented care, that would be my big advice to graduate midwives coming out. Get into an MGP, you will be hothoused as a midwife.
Yeah, it's great advice there, Anne. And lastly, on to you, Barb. The final word to you in terms of your tips for new grads and what we do to support them.
I think because most of the graduate, well, the students train in the big cities, I think don't be afraid to go out to rural areas. I think you will see so much more than what you see in the city. I mean, I've got colleagues that are out in the rural, remote, up in the Torres Straits, and they absolutely love it. Like, it's a different population. You will see things that you don't see in the city. So I think any aspiring new graduates, don't be scared to go outside of the big city. Like, don't, because actually I hear comments that I've done rural and remote, and you're often there on your own, but you have to think, and that's how you learn. And if you don't know, you look it up. And there's so much technology now, just so much, I think the midwifery education line that Queensland Health have got, you can access the educators there as well. So the help's there. You've just got to go out there. There are jobs, but don't get set that you want to work at the Royal Brisbane Hospital. Like, it's not the be all end all place to be.
That's a very good point to end on, Barb. Thanks very much. And how inspirational have our 4 speakers been tonight, Chris and Anne and Barb and Veronica. And thank you all so much for your contribution. We just love our stories, don't we, nurses and midwives? And we have gone a little bit over time because of that, but it has been so inspirational listening to all of you, and it just absolutely fills up the well, doesn't it? We feel recharged when we listen to each other's stories and what motivates us to continue to do what we're doing and do the fantastic job that nurses and midwives do every day and show leadership at every level within our professions. So now we're going to do a little bit of a draw now, everyone, for our prizes. As I said, thanks to Frankie 4, all members who have attended tonight will receive a $20 Frankie 4 voucher for shoes, and that'll be sent to everybody after the session. You'll also have a chance to win one of 4 pairs of Frankie 4 shoes and one of 10 $50 Frankie 4 vouchers, which we'll be withdrawing now. And I think Ebony is going to actually do that. So good luck, everybody. Ebs, are you going to be in control of the random draw?
Yes, here we go, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight. So the 4 winners of the pairs of shoes, we've got Chrissy, Kerry, Tina and Fiona. Congratulations. I'll be in contact tomorrow to send you the details. And then we have the 10 winners of the $50 voucher, which is Rebecca, Charlotte, Jennifer, Wendy, Carol, Ada, Jeanne, Sally, Denise and Madison. So you also get a $50 voucher. And as Beth said, everyone that has attended tonight will get a $20 voucher off a pair of Frankie 4 shoes.
Oh, and thank you, Ebony, for all of your support work and pulling this together. We'd be absolutely lost without you and the work that you do with these presentations. So thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. It's been an absolute privilege to share this event for International Nurses Day with everybody. Happy International Nurses Day. Happy International Day of the Midwife for last week, everybody. You are all an inspiration. Keep doing what you're doing. And I'd just like to sign off now. Everybody stay safe. The storm seems to have passed in Brisbane, and so we're all okay. And stay safe, everybody, and we'll be in touch again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.